them about how to behave and think in certain ways. Do you see what I'm saying? So,
she had a dolly the other day. And she was saying the dolly was angry. The dolly was naughty or something. She was smacking it. And then she looked at me and she said, "Oh, it's okay. She doesn't have a mum." So she's obviously heard people, because she has a lot of tantrums herself, obviously heard people saying, "Oh, it's okay. She doesn't have a mum."
yeah, or somehow she made that connection. Yeah, that you can hurt kids who don't have mothers. Right. You know, how do kids learn things? They learn by experiencing them, by watching what's around them, and they interpret it subjectively from their own perspective. And that includes their cognitive perspective, their ability to represent the world in more or less complex ways, depending on how old they are and how, you know, sort of cognitively adept they are, and social and emotional ways. And so, you know, clearly that little girl, I mean, the thing that people do, all people do, is they struggle to reconcile and make sense of the things around them and to use the sense they make to make predictions about what's going to happen next and what they should do. And that play that child is doing is just showing you how she's making sense of the things she's seen around her and using those to act out and understand what that means for how you treat people and why you treat people certain ways and how that relates to their circumstances. You know, a kind of flip example of this process that shows you how people do this and how they don't do it is found in the case of immigrant kids, right? Kids who are suddenly taken, you know, especially early teen years where they're sort of independent from their parents a little bit, like, you know, age 7, 8, up to 14, 15, 16. They're, you know, they spend time in school away from their families and stuff like that, but they don't really have a sophisticated understanding of the world yet, and they're young and they're still building an understanding of what the world outside their family is like. You know, kids who are suddenly forced to emigrate alone or with their families, even with their families, under very sudden conditions of duress, like political refugees and things like that. When they get to their new country, you know, one day they're living in Rwanda. I have some very good friends who this happened to. One day they're living in Rwanda, having a perfectly lovely life, and all of a sudden somebody knocks on their door and they get marched to a stadium and they never see their house again, and they're gone, and now they're Americans, right? What happens to those kids oftentimes is that when they go back years later and think about those experiences, they report that they actually fail to build memories around that experience. They do not have any personal memories from that time period oftentimes, and they don't really know what happened to them or why or what it felt like. They have the facts of the case that they've been told, but they don't remember it in a deep sense. And what that shows us is that when you haven't when the cultural context and the social framing and the meaning making that you have, which is very situated and contextualized at that age, is ripped away from you, and you're plopped in a new place all of a sudden and your life changes all of a sudden. Kids don't have, you know, lacking the sort of social framing and cultural understanding to make sense of and predict what's happening. That stuff doesn't work at all anymore. They fail to actually make sense of what's happening to them, and because of that, they can't remember it either. And so it just shows us, it's kind of the flip side of what you're saying. So here's a little child who's experienced a bunch of things about the world and who's struggling actively to make sense of why those things happen like they do, and how that means she should act. And then the immigrant kid, you know, from Rwanda, my little friend Yvette, for example, you know, she had several years where she was silent, she wouldn't talk, after she immigrated from Rwanda, and now she's in medical school. But at that time, she reports now she has no memories for that. Because when you take away somebody's cultural framework, their ways of knowing and understanding things, when those things are no longer have their predictive power, you can't make sense of your world, you can't make predictions about what's going to happen, and you become very passive oftentimes, and you don't form memories either. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah?
I was interested in what you were saying about us making the space and providing the activities that will encourage children to enter into those reflective and deeper thinking stages and states. And I'm wondering whether there are particular activities or strategies that you have come across for say, young children, just to not only people, some early childhood or say 6 years old or so, that actually encourage them to start thinking in that way?
Sure. Yeah, so one thing I think, this is just my opinion, I haven't tested this yet, is, turn off the entertainment media, right? You don't need to have a movie on at every moment that your mom needs a break. Go do something, you know what I mean? Play with yourself. Daydream in the car, right? You don't need the movie on for the 3-hour drive. Look out the window and just imagine stuff. It's a lot more work for the parents not to have that stuff. Okay? But then kids get used to it and they start to entertain themselves. They chit-chat with their sister sitting next to them. They look out and imagine stuff. So turn that stuff off. And then, the kinds of techniques like stilling, came from over here, or this meta moment that I mentioned before, can be adapted for use with young kids. Stop and think about how this makes another person feel. Stop acting. Get out of your musculoskeletal body for a minute and think about it. And then also letting kids play at that age, because that is their, I think it probably is, we can't show this neurobiologically yet, but I think it probably is them imagining out the things that the rest of us do on that default mode network in silence. They have to actually leak out. And so they play out, almost dream out their possibility space through their play. And so allowing them to engage that way, of course, I'm not the first person to say, let kids play, but it's probably, a very important substrate for learning these kinds of skills, for appreciating other people's emotional implications of your actions.
Okay, we might leave it there. In moving to winding this up, I'd like to say I'd like to take the credit for talent spotting. However, I didn't do any of the work in arranging the visit to Newcastle, and so that was done by Gavin Hazel, and I'd like to invite Gavin to say some words of thanks to Mary Helen.
Hi all. I'm Gavin Hazel. I'm one of the acting program manager at the Hunter Institute. Who and I aren't related, so we'll just get that out of the way. His name, I have one. Very cool family. A couple of things I just want to touch on in wrapping this up. I think, firstly and importantly, to Mary Helen and to all of you, I'd like to thank you for your time here today. I think we've talked about the importance of taking time, the moment to invest sometimes in thinking deeply or broadly or differently about things, and that's valuable. So I appreciate for many people that it's busy to find that, but I can't speak to you, so I'll speak to myself. I think that it's been very valuable, and I think the difficulties and sacrifices people have made, cramming it into a busy schedule, putting it in, reflect how important it is. We will make choices that create these opportunities. But I'd like to acknowledge that happening. I also think what's been very important here is, through her leadership of the Institute, continuing to contribute to trying to shape and inform and create opportunities in the space within the community and amongst multidisciplinary professional groups to engage with these issues. So drawing together educators, psychologists, clinicians, teacher trainers, and putting them into the same space, because we don't actually come together unless it's around a critical issue and we talk about something that's gone wrong. So I think the opportunity to think about how discipline things weave and combine and then take the various lessons back. So I think there is much meaning to be made from today, and hopefully a conversation will go broadly from this. And I would encourage you to look at those websites, and there are a number of other presentations and materials around this available through public domain information that I would encourage you also to look at. And we at the Institute touch on a little bit of this work as well. So there might be some connections and relationships we can build. Thank you again. Thank you to Mary Helen. She showed great empathy in reflecting me sitting on the site at 5 in the morning, looking at her in a wonderful sunny room. That was indeed the thing in the world to do, but I think it all came together quite smoothly. It's easy to organise events as this has been. I do it all the time. Saying it, sure. Thank you very much again.